Hello everyone, welcome to the Tim Booker channel. Wishing you a pleasant listening experience. Today, I'll be interpreting a rather unconventional book titled An End to Suffering. It delves into the life of someone familiar, Buddha. We're acquainted with Buddha as the founder of Buddhism, originally named Siddhartha Gautama, who lived over 2 millennia ago in northern India. Most of us possess some level of understanding regarding Buddha's narrative. So why is this book deemed unconventional? Firstly, its conclusions are quite unorthodox. Despite Buddha being a historical figure from over 2,000 years ago, the author contends otherwise. According to them, Buddha was a contemporary individual. Furthermore, the author posits Buddha as someone who existed within urban life. It contrasts starkly with the traditional image of Buddha as a figure removed from modernity, secluded from the bustle, and immersed in ancient serenity. Secondly, the narrative style itself diverges from the norm. Biographies typically follow a linear progression from birth to achievements, but not this book. It doesn't chronicle Buddha's life in a straightforward manner. Structurally, the book unfolds as a decade-long journey undertaken by the author, where Buddha's story gradually unfurls amidst the narration of the author's travels. Reading this book feels akin to watching a continuously shifting movie. Through the author's lens, we oscillate between our contemporary world and the world of Buddha over 2 millennia ago. Intriguingly, as the plot progresses, these two worlds, separated by thousands of years, unexpectedly converge and intertwine. Essentially, in the author's perspective, the present and the world Buddha inhabited exhibit astonishing similarities. Consequently, the author boldly asserts that the circumstances of Buddha's time fundamentally parallel those confronting us today. From this vantage point, Buddha emerges as a figure of the modern era. You might wonder about the author's identity and motivations for employing such an unconventional approach to depicting Buddha. Allow me to introduce the author. The mind behind this book is Pankaj Mishra, a renowned Indian thinker acclaimed as heir to Sed. Additionally, he identifies as both a thinker and a wanderer, hailing from India, traversing the globe, and ultimately settling in London. These dual identities, philosopher and wanderer, explain his choice of embarking on a journey to encounter Buddha's life in such a manner. Mishra initiated this journey with the initial intent to comprehend Buddha, yet by its culmination, he found solace in Buddha's teachings. Throughout this pursuit, tracing Buddha's footsteps, encountering Buddha's essence multiple times in the spiritual realm, Mishra gradually grasped that Buddha had long ago indicated a path to redemption for humanity. In this process, Mishra underwent his own spiritual evolution. Following this thread, I'll divide the book's main content into 3 parts. 1. Firstly, we'll focus on the contemporary landscape, exploring the predicaments faced by the author and those around him. We'll delve into why a modern-day individual like the author was drawn to Buddha. 2. Secondly, we'll immerse ourselves in Buddha's world, understanding the challenges he confronted in his era and uncovering the similarities between Buddha's world and ours today. 3. Finally, we'll examine the remedies Buddha proposed for the issues of his time and contemplate the revelations Buddha's story might offer us in the present day. Let's begin with the first section, directing our attention to the contemporary setting. The narrative of this book revolves around a journey tracing the footsteps of Buddha. Before formally embarking on this journey, the author briefly and incidentally visited Buddha's birthplace in Lumbini when he was just 16 years old. At that time, accompanying him was a fellow schoolmate named Vinod. Vinod was a passionate individual, disinterested in Lumbini and unsympathetic toward Buddha. He felt figures like Buddha misled India. He said, "They taught us to be passively submissive, preached about the noble life of ethics, and warned that only through self-restraint could one attain fulfillment, but they didn't teach us how to live in the real world." Vinod believed that India's long-conditioned acceptance of adversity and submission among its people allowed external colonizers like the British to easily and enduringly subjugate them. He believed India urgently needed to rise, become stronger, learn to love wealth and comfort, enjoy various aspects of life instead of just passively submitting, which led to accumulating poverty and weakness. According to Vinod, there's no virtue in accumulating poverty and weakness. He insisted that addressing reality was a prerequisite before tending to one's spiritual life. He went as far as to provocatively suggest that perhaps there was no need to attend to spiritual life at all, it was a luxury, and Buddha represented an unaffordable luxury for India. Vinod's perceptions were deeply entwined with his life circumstances. He was born into a Brahmin family in a rural area. As we know, India traditionally had a caste system, dividing people into 4 categories, with Brahmins being the most esteemed. Essentially, Vinod lived a life of privileged status in the countryside. Reflecting on his childhood, Vinod recalled studying in the village where teachers punished other students but always greeted him warmly. Farmers in the fields would tremble at the sight of his father, and his uncle, a ruffian, perpetrated unchecked dominance in the village without consequences. Vinod said, times were changing, urban areas were rapidly developing. But in these rural places, change was minimal, and life remained quite the same. During his childhood, he took the influence of his family's power for granted, assuming he would inherit everything from his father and spend his life in the countryside. However, a visit from his cousins from the city made Vinod realize his situation. His cousins wore Swiss-made shoes while he could only wear locally crafted ones. They watched movies every month while his entertainment was limited to the radio. This realization sparked a longing in Vinod for the world beyond and a growing dissatisfaction with the land where he grew up. He aspired to study in the city. Driven by this fervent desire, Vinod eventually persuaded his family to allow him to attend university in the city. Yet, upon witnessing that the people at the university lacked ambition, his expectations were shattered. He studied relentlessly but questioned, for what purpose? Just to secure a job? How different is this from staying in the village? Thus, he began seeking solace in books, particularly in philosophical texts promoting Western ideologies. Gradually, he developed the ideas we mentioned earlier, emphasizing the need for proactive pursuits of wealth, comfort, and power. He mentioned that after acquiring this knowledge, he couldn't accept the complacency of returning to his former serene life in the village. He said, "The world is advancing, people have reached the moon and are conquering time and space. They live in the nuclear age while we remain stagnant." He even unknowingly started to neglect his parents, feeling disdain and impatience as he believed they were unaware of anything beyond their small world. Yet, after forming such opinions about his parents, he felt deeply ashamed. At the time when the author heard Vinod speak these words, he was relatively young and didn't entirely grasp Vinod's meaning. Nonetheless, those words left a profound impression on him. Years later, reflecting on this conversation, the author began to realize that Vinod's growth was marked by confusion, ignorance, and fear, a search for certainty. In fact, Vinod's ideas were representative. After the author embarked on his journey, he encountered numerous individuals with similar thoughts. He observed that, with India's rapid development over the decades, millions left their native environments and flooded into cities. Within urban settings, the social structures built around caste systems ceased to hold significance, seen as symbols of backwardness. People no longer derived their identities and security from traditions. Instead, they viewed themselves as independent entities, embracing their own freedom and the advancements brought by modernization. However, the author keenly observed that this rapid departure from traditions brought both freedom and pain. Some individuals couldn't tolerate being uprooted from traditional society and sought refuge in secluded mountain villages, resisting everything about the modern world. The author's old landlord, Mr. Sharma, was one such individual. Sharma harbored a fervent passion for India's past. He considered Sanskrit, the ancient language of India, as the mother of all European languages, praised India's classical scriptures, yet simultaneously criticized the decline of contemporary Indian spirituality and the ecological destruction caused by modern civilization. Sharma also shared his understanding of Buddha. To him, Buddha was a deity of Hinduism, the 10th reincarnation of the Hindu deity Vishnu, emerging from the mouth of Brahma, the creator. Whenever Sharma enthusiastically spoke about these topics, the author's response was a mere, "Yes, exactly," followed by an attempt to change the subject. The author admired Sharma's simple yet dignified lifestyle but didn't aspire to live like him. He wanted to look forward. In jest, the author even mentioned in the book, if Mr. Sharma had fewer biases against modern science and hygiene, perhaps he could have helped me fix the perennially leaking toilet. Of course, these realizations came after numerous reflections during the journey. At the initiation of the trip, the author was barely in his 20s, much like many others at that age. He wasn't entirely sure of his thoughts, he just felt consumed by anxiety about his future life, yearning for a kind of redemption he couldn't articulate. In that frame of mind, he chanced upon an old monk. The monk was engrossed in the handwritten scriptures before him, with a dim lamp casting a crimson hue on the pages. Unperturbed by the sudden intrusion, the monk seemed to exist in his own world, silently coexisting with the vast emptiness around him. This encounter sparked the author's interest in Buddha. He said, looking back now, it seems incredible, someone like me, who knew so little about the world, had numerous selfish desires, an extreme longing for love and fame, yearning for travel and adventure, yet couldn't forget about an individual incongruent with these desires, a historical figure born 25 centuries ago. And so, the author embarked on the journey to trace Buddha's footsteps. Initially, Buddha remained a semi-fictional historical figure in the author's mind. However, as he traveled through various regions of northern India, retracing Buddha's paths, he gradually sensed that Buddha was a flesh-and-blood figure. The image of Buddha in the author's mind became increasingly profound and vivid. In the minds of many, Buddha lived in a relatively simple ancient world. Consequently, some believe that even if he were alive today, he would likely feel lost in the complexity of our modern world. His ancient teachings might seem feeble and inadequate in today's age. However, the author contends that Buddha's world was as complex and ever-changing as today's. The various sufferings we face today were abundant in Buddha's era over 2 millennia ago. Consider this, when discussing contemporary spiritual dilemmas, we often attribute them to modernization, claiming they are unique to this new era and were absent in our ancestors' time. Yet, the author insists that the unique sufferings of our era were prevalent over 2,000 years ago, experienced by Buddha's generation, no less. To comprehend this perspective, we need to explore Buddha's world together. In the 6th century BCE, Buddha was born in northern India, specifically the previously mentioned region of Lumbini, which currently lies within Nepal at its border with India. You're likely familiar with the outlines of Buddha's life. His birth name was Siddhartha Gautama, a prince from a remote kingdom, living a life of abundance. However, after witnessing aging, sickness, and death, he fell into doubt and introspection. Consequently, he chose to leave his home and embark on a solitary journey seeking enlightenment. Ultimately, he attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, attracting followers and forming a monastic community. He spent the rest of his life wandering northern India, elucidating the origins of suffering and its remedies to humanity. Now, this story leaves us with 2 questions. First, why did Buddha choose the path of leaving home to seek enlightenment? There are various ways to confront suffering, but leaving home isn't the common choice. So, why did Buddha opt for this? Secondly, how did Buddha manage to form a monastic community? This implies that besides Buddha, others chose to leave home. Was this an isolated incident or a societal trend of that time? To answer these, we need to backtrack before Buddha's birth and examine what transpired in that land. We're all aware of India's historical caste system, dividing people into 4 classes: Brahmins, the priestly and scholarly class; Kshatriyas, the nobility and warriors; Vaishyas, the merchants, landlords, and moneylenders; and Shudras, the lowest in societal hierarchy, somewhat above slaves. By Buddha's time, India's caste system was firmly established. Its inception stemmed from the shift of the Aryan people in India from nomadic to settled lifestyles, necessitating a division of labor. The Brahmins, responsible for rituals, constructed a mythological framework around this division to solidify their privileges. In this system, each caste symbolized a different part of a divine body, dictating social status based on birth. While today we view the caste system as archaic and regressive, at the time, it ensured stability and development in primitive Indian society. The Vaishyas, serving as landlords and merchants, provided surplus food, propelling Aryan society beyond its tribal origins, fostering growth. Centuries passed, and North India gradually formed many towns. Some cosmopolitan centers emerged, attracting people from all directions, and currency began circulating locally as a unit of exchange. In modern terms, before Buddha's birth, a wave of urbanization swept northern India. The impact of this urbanization was immense. Brahmin privileges faced a significant challenge in urban areas. As previously mentioned, Brahmins held positions as priests, primarily overseeing rituals. However, in urban settings, where people didn't rely heavily on agriculture, the significance of these rituals drastically declined. As the book suggests, money became the new measure of value in cities, granting unprecedented privileges to the merchant class. An insignificant merchant could hire esteemed Brahmins. Consequently, under the pressure of this emerging urban lifestyle, the societal stability maintained through religious rituals began crumbling. People started re-evaluating themselves, realizing that the traditional social hierarchy was a human construct, not a divine decree. Many rejected the societal order set by Brahmins, leaving their homes to travel across northern India, propagating their new discoveries and perspectives. This movement is historically termed the Shramana movement in ancient India, initially referring to these emerging philosophical sects challenging Brahmin orthodoxy, including later Buddhism. During this time, these new spiritual teachers, akin to ancient Greek or Chinese philosophers, engaged in debates and attracted audiences. Among these spectators was Siddhartha Gautama, the young Buddha. From the narrative so far, you might sense that Buddha lived in a time of great change. Many left their familiar homelands, entering entirely unknown environments. New ideas blossomed, granting freedom but also prompting a quest for spiritual belonging. As previously mentioned, Siddhartha Gautama, born into luxury as a prince, was already disillusioned with his life. Despite his destined inheritance and the comforts, he was deeply introspective. He felt repulsed by witnessing the elderly but feared he, too, would face that stage of life, erasing all his pride in superiority. Observing desire drive people's lives within his father's palace, seeking eternal youth, health, and vitality amidst inevitable change, he concluded, there is no happiness in desires, they bring pain, anxiety, and misery. Amidst this turmoil, he noticed wandering ascetics, suggesting an escape from suffering. This observation led him to decide to follow them. At this young age of 29, Siddhartha was full of restlessness and anxiety, seeking a mentor. He pursued several teachers, none satisfying his quest. Subsequently, he embarked on 6 years of intense asceticism, an arduous practice, eating only once in 7 days, never sitting, always standing or squatting, and refraining from bathing. Eventually, he questioned the sense of self-torment. He wondered if his intense pursuit of enlightenment was counterproductive. Recollecting moments of joy through meditation, he questioned his fear of happiness. His introspection pushed him to the edge of enlightenment. One day, on the brink of starvation due to his extreme asceticism, he broke his 6-year vow. He consumed a little rice porridge, applied oil to his body, took a warm bath, and headed into the forest. One night, under a Bodhi tree, he sat down. What followed next, you might be familiar with. It was at this moment, under the Bodhi tree, that Buddha attained enlightenment. Part 3. So, what did Buddha realize? Let's briefly discuss Buddha's conclusion. Buddha said suffering is the fundamental problem of life. Aging, illness, death, these are suffering. Inner sorrow, distress, and anxiety are also suffering. Why does this suffering trouble us so much? Why is it hard to find lasting happiness? Buddha said it's because our lives are impermanent. Nothing in our lives remains constant, this is what's termed as impermanence. Therefore, whenever we experience joy, suffering isn't far behind when life's circumstances change. In essence, as long as our happiness is derived from external conditions, that happiness cannot be permanent because these conditions are always in flux. So, what's the solution? Buddha shifted attention to our mind. He emphasized that our perception of the external world is possible because of our mind. Without the mind, we cannot have consciousness or perceive an external world. Thus, the book says the mind is the window through which humans access reality. Without the mind, we can't experience various emotions, happiness, pain, contentment, or frustration. Although these emotions seem triggered by the external world, they ultimately originate within the human mind. Hence, the mind is where we need to focus. However, here's the issue, you say the world is impermanent, and we should focus on the mind, but our minds are also impermanent. You might have experienced moments when, despite tranquility, your mind was inundated with unwelcome thoughts. So, how do we address this from the mind? Buddha said, the key lies in recognizing these thoughts. What does that mean? According to Buddha, if you mindfully observe your thoughts, you'll realize your mind is a continuous stream of thoughts. It's not a concrete entity, it's fleeting, like an endless river. Thus, Buddha concluded, the so-called self is an illusion. Because of this awareness of the self, desires regarding me arise, and this attachment to desires is the root of suffering. Of course, I won't delve too deeply into Buddhist doctrines here. Still, I'd like to share an insight from the author. Initially, upon hearing Buddha's explanation of the self concept, the author couldn't agree. The author felt that in daily life, the existence of the self is distinctly felt. Moreover, this self has to eat, drink, sleep, think continuously, it has continuity. Can you argue that you wake up as a different person every time you rise from sleep? Later, the author understood why Buddha conveyed this concept. Buddha wasn't presenting an abstract philosophical system. He didn't intend to debate whether the self exists or not through abstract reasoning. Perhaps you've heard the idea that Buddhism isn't a religion, it's a philosophical thought system. The author's perspective is more radical. He believes Buddha isn't concerned with philosophy. He's more like a doctor, his purpose is simply to cure the illness. Regarding Buddha, there's a story. Once a monk asked him if the self exists, to which he remained silent. When the monk continued, asking if it doesn't exist, Buddha remained silent again. He never intended to debate with others. According to the author, all of Buddha's teachings were simply about providing the right medicine. Buddha realized that excessive attachment to the self leads one to see everything and everyone, including others, as mere objects or tools. This fixation on self-desires leads to viewing the world either as instruments to satisfy desires or obstacles hindering their fulfillment. This process reinforces self-consciousness, convincing oneself of being separate from others, ultimately leading to feelings of greed, hate, and anger. Therefore, Buddha's teachings aimed at reversing this process. He urged us to be vigilant in our thinking, to break this entrenched self-consciousness. It wasn't about eliminating the concept of self from life but about developing a different perspective. From this angle, we can understand many of Buddha's actions. For instance, he didn't encourage followers to worship or deify him. He didn't seek to be treated as a saint, nor did he want people to crave meeting him. He even once said to someone wanting to see him, "What use is seeing this fragile body?" Moreover, although Buddha engaged with some kings to spread his ideas, he had no political ambitions or intentions to transform the world. Not because he was passive, but because he was pragmatic. He knew what he could do and focused on individual change. Just like the saying the author once heard, when faced with challenging problems, practitioners mend their own shoes rather than instantly carpeting the entire earth. After enlightenment, Buddha didn't retreat to deep forests but remained active in cities. This wasn't surprising because his ideas could flourish due to emerging urban civilizations. Many of Buddha's followers were merchants at the time. They broke free from traditional societal constraints but fell into a spiritual wanderlust, lacking inner security. Hence, Buddha established the monastic order, in a way, creating a community that absorbed these uprooted individuals, allowing them to reintegrate and coexist within the collective. Buddha aimed to change people's perceptions of themselves, emphasizing that everything in the world exists within an interconnected web of causality. Whether physical phenomena or human beings, nothing exists in isolation. All rely on mutual interdependence. From this perspective, Buddha indeed resembled a good physician treating the world's ailments. His teachings could serve as a healing balm for people's minds today. Continuing from the previous discussion, let's delve into the author's experiences in the later stages of his journey. Earlier, people like Vinod, the author's classmate, embraced Western ideologies, viewing surpassing the West as India's future development. However, when the author first arrived in London, he found that Western metropolises didn't exude the enchanting allure he had imagined. Meeting his friends in London, he realized their lives weren't as satisfying as expected, experiencing the unique loneliness of city life. Every day in London, he witnessed impassive commuters heading silently to offices via light rails and subways. On Fridays, he saw inebriated individuals stumbling home late at night, only greeted by the unyielding doors of their houses. He noted that people here seemed to lead lives of both joy and sorrow, a life that appeared appealing yet simultaneously frustrating and disheartening. Reflecting on the past, he lamented how Europe brought forth a new worldview to India, one that was self-centered. While it liberated the individual, it also intensified desires, glorifying personal needs, making self-gratification the ultimate goal, establishing self-interest as a prevailing principle. Within such moral environments, individual suffering became deeper. Looking back at his life, the author found himself deeply entangled in desires and impulses, experiencing profound existential drift. This, in turn, caused a sense of panic. Thankfully, during his travels, he encountered Buddha. Buddha informed him that the human mind, filled with desires, hatred, and misconceptions, creates past glories, present failures, and future hopes. It also creates the potential for infinite suffering. Yet, it's precisely this spiritual realm that provides the opportunity to truly grasp one's life. By recognizing impermanence and understanding the self, one gradually breaks free from the shackles of desires. We no longer mistakenly believe certain things are necessities. Achieving this, we gain freedom. Moreover, this freedom isn't elsewhere, it's right here, right now. Here ends the interpretation of An End to Suffering. We've journeyed through the realms of the mind with the author, traversing between history and reality, even encountering Buddha. Through this voyage, the author concludes what was mentioned at the beginning: Buddha isn't a mythical, fictional deity or an outdated philosopher obscured by historical dust. He's a contemporary figure who remains relevant. The author expresses, "Now, I encounter Buddha in my own world. I see the principles of Buddhism and the potential for redemption it might create for humanity. This realization finally allows me to pick up the pen and begin writing about Buddha." So, that's all I wanted to share with you. Congratulations on completing another book. Thank you for your support and attention. Please subscribe to the Tim Booker channel, like, and share this valuable knowledge with friends. Let's combine wisdom and practice to achieve financial goals and create a better future together. Thank you all, goodbye.